How would you assess the job of Rob Blake?
Extremely successful rebuild. It's honestly impressive to watch.
What's up, Kings fans? Welcome back to another episode of Tradin Jabs. Joining me this week is ESPN NHL insider, reporter, and commentator, as well as co-host of the weekly podcast In the Crease, Emily Kaplan. Emily, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh my God, Jack, it is my pleasure. I am so pumped to chat hockey with you.
Yeah, as am I, especially for someone who seemingly is spending 24/7 hockey. So it's great. I can't wait for your insight. And at least I want to start it with the NHL All-Star Game. You know, you were there, you covered it in Vegas. The Kings have only played one game, so it's not like we're bypassing too much here. What did you make of the festivities, in Vegas as they tried to showcase the NHL's best?
Honestly, it just felt so good. We're now in our third straight pandemic affected season, which is just wild to say.
Yeah.
And I feel like all we've been talking about is what we don't have. Like, we haven't had full fans. We haven't had normalcy of an 82 game season. And this felt like the first big league event where everyone could be there in person and we could just talk about how great the game is right now. And I thought, unfortunately, there was a lot of people who couldn't be there. Like Alex Ovechkin really wanted to be there and he wasn't. I would have liked to see a couple more younger players there. But at the same time, it was a whole celebration of, the old guard of the NHL. It still makes it great, but also this new wave coming in, the Trevor Zegrases and Jack Hughes of the world, who are not afraid to show their personality, be a little daring, different on the ice. And I just had a blast.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, it came across great on TV. And, speaking of great, Adrian Kempe, the NHL winger, but more importantly, the NHL's LA Kings winger, is someone who was the lone representative of our team. What have you made of his first half of his season and even his appearance at the All-Star game?
Yeah, I was so disappointed because I worked the Kings game against the Avalanche, and we were just talking before we went on air. I don't know what time is. It was recently-ish, like time is days. But it was when Adrian was still in COVID protocols, and I was just disappointed because I was so excited to watch him play this season. Because to me, he just feels like a different player, a guy that's elevated his game in a different way. We always viewed him as, defensive-minded, defensively responsible, but he's just flourishing so offensively. And I did get the chance to chat with him a bit in Vegas. We had a Swedish mutual friend, so we met over dinner. I met his girlfriend a bit, and just how sweet and understated he is, like as a personality. Not, when I talked about Zegras and Hughes wanting to put themselves out there, he's definitely a little bit more of an old school guy. And I just feel like he's so well adjusted that he's poised for the success. And it was probably coming for a long time, but just where the team is at the last couple of years, I know was so difficult on the players, seeing all of their friends and teammates get traded away and rebuilding for the future. And now with everything coming together, for him to take this step at this time, it's just so good for the organization.
Yeah, I mean, a career high in goals already. We're just over halfway through this season, and someone who has had a lot of pressure on himself, but has clearly been able to handle it and really flourish, as you mentioned this year. But you actually lead me kind of right into my next question, and that's the Kings as a whole. You look at what Rob Blake has done in the last, 3-something years, and that's take a team, rebuilt or I think retooled is maybe the word that the organization used. Bring in Todd McClellan, acquire picks, acquire some youth, and get rid of some of those prominent names that were part of the Stanley Cup runs in the 2012 and 14 years. 3 years later, after we've kind of started over in some ways, how would you assess the job of Rob Blake?
Extremely successful rebuild. It's honestly impressive to watch because he had a vision, he executed that vision. That vision wasn't hard, like saying goodbye to some of the names that they had to say goodbye to who helped win those Stanley Cups, like isn't easy. And it's not easy for the guys that stayed, like the Drew Dowdys and the Dustin Browns and the Jonathan Quicks. We're like, wait, all of our friends are leaving us and you're making us a worse team because we're going to be better in the future. Like, this doesn't make sense. I still want to compete here. But what I think Rob and his team did such a great job of was clear and effective communication. It felt like they really were talking to those veterans throughout. This is our plan. This is why we're doing it. And then in talking to Rob this year, he was like, yeah, we were really open and honest with them at their exit meetings, but they were open and honest with us too, of saying like, hey, we weathered this the last couple of years, like get us some help. And they did, they go out and get Victor Arvidsson, they go out and get Philip Deneau. And then all of a sudden you have a team that has the veterans that are in place that stayed here, have a couple veteran players that came in, but have a really good pipeline of talent of these young guys that have now gotten experience or are just coming up and have a ton of hype. And there's so many teams in the NHL that would wish they were in the Kings position right now.
Yeah, no question. It's slowly becoming, or quickly becoming a team that is to be reckoned with. But at the same time, you bring up two names that I really did want to dive into, and that's the free agent acquisition and the trade acquisition this offseason, and Victor Arvidsson and Philip Deneau. Two guys that one a little bit more flash than the other, but both have been extremely valuable. What have you made of the way that they have impacted the LA Kings?
Yeah, I think Arvidsson, I'll begin with, he just gives them that veteran depth. I think the last couple of years, you could look at the forward lines and just be like, all right, if you get past the first line or second line, like there's not much there. Yeah. And all of a sudden you've got this guy that has a proven history that he can be a scorer. He's got speed. It's great. And then with Philip Deneau, I mean, last year's Stanley Cup Finals, when we talk about the Montreal Canadiens, we give a ton of credit to Carey Price for getting them there. And I think he deserves all of it because he stood on his head. But I want to give more credit to Phil Deneau than he's receiving in revisionist history, because he was so instrumental in shutting down the star offensive talent on every team the Canadiens upset to get to where they were. And you're seeing that defensive responsibility here with the Kings. And, it's challenging now because they've built this team, especially at the center position. And you're like, oh my God, they have too much center depth. Like, how are they going to find, like, Quinton Byfield, is he really going to be the third line center for the foreseeable future? Like, maybe now the next couple of years, but like down the road, what's going to give? You look at a guy like Alex Turcotte and you're like, how is he going to fit in? But trust me, that is a problem that so many other teams want to have, because finding centers on the open market is so difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good problem, like you mentioned, for the Kings to have. And let's talk about Quinton Byfield. Someone who's got 8 games now under his belt this season. He's dealt with some injuries early on in the season and into the preseason, but he's back. He's healthy. He's looking better than ever. What have you made of the second overall pick of 2020 so far?
So in the game that I had when I first got to, see him in person, blown away just by his size. I'm sure everyone is. He's just a big dude, but he skates so effortlessly, which I think is what makes him unique. It doesn't feel laborious at all. He's a really good skater, and someone that just projects this quiet confidence. Talking to people around the Kings, I was really interested in hearing a little bit more about what he's like off the ice. For example, we know he's the highest drafted Black player in NHL history, and that's incredible, and it's such an achievement for him. But he's not really willing to talk about it yet or feel comfortable, because he's like, I'm still young and I'm still finding my feet, and I'm not sure what my opinion on this is. And I know when I do speak, my voice will have power. So I just want to make sure that I've got experience and I've formed my opinion, that when I do speak, it means something. And I'm like, to have that maturity at 19 years old to say something like that, it just blew my mind. And I was so impressed by that. So I can see why the veteran guys would really like him. And yeah, just, it comes so naturally for him, and talking to Rob Blake when he was in the AHL, doing his bit of conditioning when he was coming back up, they had to talk to him and say, look, like, some of the things you're getting away with here, like, you can't do when you get to the NHL. But nothing seems to faze him. No stage seems to faze him. No spotlight seems to faze him. And all of those things, I think, are ingredients to make a really successful longtime pro.
Yeah, it really is baffling how wise beyond the years so many of these young players that are coming into the league are. But for QB, it's great to see the confidence there, like you mentioned. You came out on Monday with an article on ESPN, and it was 20 big questions leading into this last half of the NHL season. The Kings were mentioned, particularly in one area, and that was the trade deadline. Now, it's coming up on March 21st. It's expected to be a little bit more of an active offseason or active trade deadline, I'm assuming, based on what we're hearing. For Kings fans, there's one sexy defensive name out there, but I'll let you touch on him. But in general, who should the Kings be, maybe on the lookout for? and who should they be aware of? And frankly, what do you see the strategy being for LA?
I actually think there's a couple sexy names when it comes to blue liners. Like when you look at how the trade market is shaping up, there's a lot of defensemen on expiring contracts. I mean, the biggest name, and maybe this is the guy you were alluding to, is Jacob Chychrun, because he's got a couple years left on his deal, which is always exciting to players. He's in Arizona where maybe he's not realizing his full potential because Arizona's team is not really up to par with the other talent of the NHL teams. I'll put it that way, by design. It's what they want. He's a guy that if you would take him on, though, you would have to give a massive package for. There's a guy like John Klingberg, who's in Dallas, Ben Sherratt, who's in Montreal. I think there will be a lot of speculation about him now that Marc Bergevin, who was in Montreal, is now in the LA Kings front office. But the reason I'm mentioning blue liners is I think the Kings are going to look to add some depth defensemen. You know, I think with the injuries that they have, Edler has been a bit just disappointing that they haven't been able to see him play yet because of the injury that he had, losing Walker for the year. Like, these are guys that, okay, the Pacific Division is so tight. As we're recording this, all teams except for the Seattle Kraken basically have a shot. They're all within 11 points of each other. And the one area that I think the Kings could bolster themselves is just adding a blue line depth guy. But I wouldn't be surprised if they added here or there, but frugally, because I think big picture, Rob Blake and his management team still has a plan and they don't want to deviate from that plan, but they want to reward the guys for what they've done already this season.
The last question I have here, and this has nothing to do with hockey. Your Twitter bio describes you as two things. One, ESPN hockey reporter, and two, bagel snob. Now, I'll preface this with my accent makes me say bagel very weird, but I'll give you the opportunity to give me your, top bagel combination for one with cream cheese and one with like a bagel sandwich. What do you got?
Okay, thank you for differentiating, because they're two fully different meals. And the reason I'm a bagel snob, and I don't mind how you pronounce it. You can pronounce it however you're from. I just mind where you get them from, because I'm from New Jersey, and we mentioned that you spent some time there in your childhood, and I lived in New York, and I just think the bagels are so superior there. And I live in Chicago now, and everyone tries to get me to try this bagel or that bagel, and I think they're garbage. I think they're not it. My entire freezer is full with New Jersey bagels that I smuggle back. So when I have them, they're always everything bagels. Like ideal Sunday would be cream cheese, lox, red onions, tomato, maybe little capers if you're feeling fancy, or just cream cheese. And then you're had a night the night before and you're waking up and you really need to feel better the next day. It's bacon, egg, and cheese.
I could not agree more. As someone who obviously grew up in the Midwest where you're living, there's only one place I'll get bagels from in Minnesota. And then otherwise, I might as well just wait till I go out east again. So you're on top of that. And no, I could not agree more with your combinations.
All right, I'm going to Minnesota soon, so I might have to pick your brain of what that spot is. I will drive anywhere for it.
Perfectly. Yeah, it's hit me up and we'll figure it out. But hey, Emily Kaplan, I appreciate you joining Tradin Jabs, and thanks for the time.
Well, love the work that you do. I so appreciate you having me on, and hope we'll talk again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.